Okay, so as you know, my name's Julie Stigmeyer, and I work in the Graduate Resource Center in the School of Education at Concordia. And so I work with two other success coaches in my department. Alyssa is a success coach, and she provides help with resume building or CV building. Also, she helps with mock interviews. So if you're ever applying for a job and you have an interview coming up, you can do a practice interview, and she'll usually get like a professor or program head to come in and sit in on that interview. So that could be helpful for you to get feedback. So I'm just going to share, see if I can tell you a little bit more about her. Our third success coach is actually out on paternal leave. So he'll be back at the end of the month, but this is our little team, and Alyssa is available as that success coach. Okay, so as you know, we've got our APA workshops going this spring. Last month, I think January, we maybe covered in-text citations. This month, we're doing numbers and capitalization, and next month will be tables and figures. So this will be especially helpful for anyone doing a dissertation because there are a lot of fussy details with tables and figures. And I'm going to partner with Elizabeth Thomas, who is a statistics coach, and she's going to come in and help us figure out how to set up tables and figures. Okay, let's see. Thought someone else could. Oh, Brittentine. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. Welcome. Glad you could join. Okay, so I'm just going to move around my screens a little bit so I can. So as I present this evening, feel free to unmute yourself, speak up. I'll try to watch the chat, but it's a little, that's sometimes a little difficult. But tonight we're just going to talk about numbers of capitals. We're not probably going to do breakout rooms this time, but we will have time for Q&A and our raffle. So at the end of our session, we'll have a raffle for either a writing care package or a copy of the APA manual, a digital version. So we'll get to that at the end. All right, so I'm just gonna present a little bit of information on numbers and how to use those in APA. And then we have plenty of practice time. So I'll be having you look at different examples and figuring out, okay, well, is this APA or not? So the reason why we even would have a workshop like this is because with any style guide, they have their own determination of what type of, how to include different terms, numerals, numbers, capitals, all those things. So we're just focusing in on these couple of things this evening. With numbers in APA, the general rule is that 10 plus are written as numerals. So we just use the numerals themselves, whereas 0 to 9 are written out as words. So if that's all we needed to know, we could say, good, we're done with our workshop, go eat dinner. But with APA, we have some exceptions. So numerals, the general rule is we use numerals for 10 and above. So here are two examples. 15 students attended the seminar, and then in this case, 5 students attended the seminar. So you can see that because that number 5 is under 10, we would write that out. So here are the exceptions. So we're talking about when to use numerals and when to use written out words. So with spans of time, even if the number falls below 10, we still use numerals. So that refers to days, months, years, even decades. So even if that number is under 10, we would just write the numeral. The same is true of all percentages. So with percentages, we use the numeral and the percent sign. Um, the only change with this one would be if that percentage would begin a sentence, then we would write it out. But in that case, I was looking at the APA manual today and it says probably best to just reword instead of starting a sentence with a number. So that's the general rule. We also use numerals for ages. So 3 years old, a 5-year-old child, all of those would be numerals. So you can see that all these are examples of numbers under 10 where normally we would write them out. And then this is where it gets a little confusing for those of you who are teachers. So, and you're writing about education. So with a place in a numbered series, like grades, we actually use the numeral. But there is an exception to this, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But when grade, the word grade comes before the number, you do write out, or you use the numeral for that number under 10. Couple more exceptions. When you're referring to your own work, so say you're writing a capstone project or a dissertation, when you're referring to your own work, we capitalize chapter or whatever the section is, and then we use the number, the numeral to refer to that. Same with the heading, although I think the EDD template may have them written out. So use whatever you're given, but typically with APA, that's the guideline. And then we also use the numerals for figures and tables. Go ahead, Pam.
I was wondering when you had 5-year-old on there and the last slide, is that typical to only have one hyphen, one dash? I think I've
Yeah,
been doing that incorrectly.
let me go back. Let me think a second. I think
I'm
you,
not trying to challenge you. I just don't know how to do
no,
it.
I'm thinking about it. I think you might be right. But the reason why we use hyphens is when we have adjectives that are working together to describe a noun. So I think you're actually right there, Pam, and there should be 2 hyphens.
Okay, so one after in between year and old.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let me
thank you.
let's just check the manual to be sure, because that's worth looking up. Um, by the way, if you have the digital manual, it's really easy to search for things. It's not as easy as like Google, but it's nice, and so you don't have to flip through a bunch of pages. I like paper copies, but this could be helpful. So let's just check that. So you can have the little search button here. Do any of you have a digital version of the manual? No. Yeah, it might be something just to consider. Okay, let me go to that section. So basically all of the information I'm sharing on my slides is from this section in the manual. And let's go to numbers expressed as numerals. And okay, sometimes oh, here we go. Oh, this is what it is, Pam. So when you have old, like 2-year-olds, then I think you use the double hyphen, but when I'm gonna look for
Oh,
another example. You see that here,
wow.
how that's different? But then was 2 years old would not
Okay.
have any hyphens. But I still think that's different from my example, so I might
Okay.
have
Thank
to
you.
come back to that. But the general rule is to, with ages, spans of time, percentages, we use the numerals. And then the last time we would use the numeral under 10 would be for dates. So this is March 6th. Hi, Hannah. I'm glad you could join. Okay, so words for numbers. When we use words, the general rule, as I mentioned, is to use words for the following. We would do 0 through 9. So, for example, we'd write out 5 here. But there are exceptions to this. So when you begin a sentence, or a heading or a title, you would, instead of using the numeral as we normally would for numbers over 10, we would write out the word. So this is why that's why I mentioned I was reading in the manual that if you don't feel like writing out like a 23, then I usually just reword the sentence. So even if you just add additionally or something, then you can get around having to write out a long number. And then I mentioned grade 6, where you have the word grade and then the numeral. And this is where it's a little bit different. So when you have an ordinal number, where we're saying, the place, like third, fourth, in this case, we would write it out as a word until we get to 10. So with that, or that, then everything after that would be numerals. Okay, now we're going to have our celebration of knowledge. My husband teaches at the university level, and he always calls them, and he like has the celebrate song. I don't know, it's kind of crazy. So anyway, I took that from him. So which statement accurately represents APA's basic numbers rule? So we're going to just go in the chat and choose A, B, or C. So A, each individual writer can choose whether to use numerals or words as long as they're consistent. Use numerals for 10 and above, but write out numbers 9 and below. Use numerals for all numbers in your writing. Okay, so seeing some answers in the chat. So this one is just kind of a quick review. And so, yeah, you're all right. This is B. We're going to use numerals for numbers 10 and above, but write out numbers 9 and below. Okay, now it gets a little more challenging. So which is correct? So the sentence is 3 students submitted their assignments 5 days before the deadline. So is it A, B, or C? This one has 2 numbers in it, so it's a little tricky. Okay, I'm seeing some B's. Okay, Anna said A. Anna, can I put you on the spot and ask you why you chose A?
Because 5 days is a span of time.
Yeah, you got it. So this was a little tricky, right? So we had to keep 3 at the beginning written out because it was the beginning of the sentence, and it's under 10. But then the span of time 5 before the days, we use the numeral. But you do notice here with C, that's incorrect because well, for a couple of reasons. Like I said, it's under 3, it's under 10, and it begins the sentence. So this is where spans of time can really throw you off. Okay, next one. Only 8% of the participants completed the survey, less than the 35% completion rate I had hoped for. So what do you think with this one? Okay, I'm seeing a little mix here, A's and B's. Okay, so can someone maybe just speak up why you chose what you did? So what was the role we were looking for here? Go ahead, Stacy.
Because percentage is always numeral?
Yep, that's right. So that's why B would be correct here. So if 8% had begun the sentence, we would write it out like this one. But in this case, because they're both percentages and they don't begin the sentence, you would make both of them in numerals. Okay, Eric, you got something going on here. I like the art you're adding. Okay, so here's our flash round. So we're gonna do A or B, okay? So she had been a nurse for 3 years. Which one is correct? You can either write it out or say A or B. Okay. So I think I can't show you the correct answers till the next slide. So let's keep going. Children in the preschool class were 4 years old. Which one would be correct here? Number 2. All right, you guys are doing great. So number 1 we saw was a span of time. Number 2 is an age. So in this case, it would be the number, the numeral. Okay, next one. The student was in grade 6. Put it written out or a numeral? Okay, great. This is the odd one where when grade comes before the number, we use the numeral. But if it's 6th grade, we'd actually write out the word sixth. Oops, I just told you the answer. So this one would be 6th, the word. Okay, we may have one more after this. Teachers gave students ice cream if they scored in the top 5%. Is that written out or a number and the percent symbol? Okay, great. So one more here. We'll come back to all of these. Oops, you can't see that bottom part, can you? Well, all it says is 17 computer programmers went out to dinner last night. So would it be written out or the numeral? All right, so let's look at our answers. I think I put them all here. So like we talked about, this is a span of time. So even though the number's under 10, we would still use the numeral. This is an age, same thing, because it is an age, we would have the exception and make it a numeral. Same thing here, when you have a list of a series of things and the word comes before, we would use the numeral. But here, this one's the trickiest one for people in education, I think. So just remember if it has a, ST for first, an ND for second, or a TH for the rest, you're going to write it out up until you get to 10. Then you use numerals. And here we'd use the percent, the numeral, and the percent symbol. And the last one is written out. Does anyone remember why that's the case?
It's at the beginning.
Yeah, it's at the beginning of the sentence. And so it feels really awkward to me anyway, but to begin a sentence with a number, but that is, so usually what I do, like I said, is just reword the sentence.
So Julie, could we clarify on that? Because I thought the exception, that was for numbers 0 through 9, that the exception was the beginning of the sentence, but that's the same way for 10 and over as well?
Let me go back here. Let's see what I shared with you, so I'm sure I told you right. Where did I have that? I guess maybe I didn't say it. Let me just look at the manual real fast. So my understanding is that because it's 17, you would normally write it as a numeral, but because it begins the sentence, you would not. So here we can see any number that begins a sentence, avoid beginning with a numeral. So 48%, 12 students. So does that make sense? Maybe I misspoke earlier.
Yes, that clarifies. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Just want to pause for a second. Any questions so far on numerals? Anything else that came up? I think we had a couple of people join. Welcome, Brittany and Nina.
It's super tricky. What's the rhyme or reason with who made the rules?
I don't know. It's the APA geniuses. I mean, I don't, you just, it would be fun for me to read sometime. What is the history of these rules?
Yeah.
And they do change occasionally, as I'm not sure if some of you know, but in 2019, there was a major revision to the manual, and like the running head at the top of the page went away for students. There were, and we can use et al. For 3+ authors from the very beginning of the paper. That used to be, you'd have to write them out in the first one, and then you could use et al., but that changed. So yeah, it can be a little fussy. Okay, let's go into capitals. Right. So I think the most important thing to know with capitalization in APA is that things are not capitalized as much as you might think. So because this is from the manual, it means APA calls itself a down style, meaning that words are lowercase unless there's specific guidance to capitalize them. So I was working on a paper earlier with a student, and the example was constructivist theory. Should that be capitalized? And the answer is no. Even though it's a name of a theory, we wouldn't capitalize that. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, this feels like something that should be capitalized, maybe question that because with APA, most things are lowercase, but we'll find some exceptions to that as well. So basically, I'll be sharing this specific guidance that says when we should capitalize. So we would capitalize these terms, racial and ethnic groups. And this is pretty obvious. The black and white now, however, are considered, would be capitalized. So the only exception to that in the manual is that if the context of the paper is describing something like white supremacy, then it's up to the author whether they want that to be capitalized or not. But typically you would capitalize all terms referring to racial and ethnic groups. So these would be pretty obvious, you know, African American, but it's the new rule is black and white are also considered, should also be capitalized. So they're just all consistent. Now, I was mentioning a couple of theories. I mentioned a theory, and this is an exception to that. So when you have a personal name within the name of a disease or a disorder or a theory, you would capitalize the word with the name in it. So notice here with Alzheimer's disease, only the A is capitalized, but not the D. So this doesn't happen very often, but another example I see sometimes is Adlerian theory. That's named after Adler. And here we have Freudian theory. But even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I kind of expect hierarchy of needs to be capitalized too, but it isn't. Only the name of the person who thought of the concept. So that's a big thing that probably the most common comment I give to students is that words don't have to be capitalized in this context.
What if you're talking about like areas of the body that have been named after people, like the Broca's area in the brain? Would Broca be capitalized?
Oh, I've never heard of that. If that's a person's name, then I'd say yes.
Okay.
But what was the whole term? Like,
Sorry?
what's the whole term that you said? Broke?
Broca's area, it's for
Oh.
speech production. It's the area of the brain for speech production.
Oh.
And then there's the Wernicke's area, which is also named after an individual.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure those would be capitalized, but probably if area came next to it, you would probably not capitalize that bit.
Okay.
That makes sense. This doesn't happen super often, but I just threw this in here. So with job titles and positions, we do not capitalize like the role or the job title unless the name comes directly after it. So the title precedes the name here. So in this case, because the title president comes before Lincoln, we would capitalize it. And we're very used to this with Mr., Ms., Doctor, even Professor. We would capitalize that, but that's technically a title. And the same down here. So those are capital, the times we would capitalize things. Do not capitalize, and this is kind of what I was mentioning. Many things are not capitalized. So post-traumatic stress disorder, if you're writing out the term, it would be lowercase. But if you make it into an acronym, you would, of course, capitalize those letters. So it would be PTSD capitalized. Autism would not be capitalized. Cognitive behavioral therapy, that would be lowercase if you place CBT after that, and then of course that acronym would be capitalized. I see common references to positive behavioral interventions and supports in papers. And then the acronym. And then I mentioned social constructivist theory. That would be lowercase. And then this was one I saw in a dissertation recently, professional learning community. And then that was used as a acronym throughout. And I just wanted to point this out. If you can see, I put the little s next to the capital C. So if you need to make that term plural, which wouldn't apply to all these, but if you need to make an acronym plural, you don't use an apostrophe, you just put the s. And this is going back to the job titles. If you have, so in this case, if the name does not follow the title, then you don't need to capitalize it. So Abraham Lincoln was president of the United States. So president is lowercase. Aisha Singh holds a doctorate. So it was Dr. Singh. And Carlos Jimenez is a professor. That would also be lowercase because the name does not come right after the title. And then the other thing to keep in mind with capitals is you've probably learned about title case for many years. I remember learning this in maybe high school, that when you have a title of a book or a journal or something, we capitalize all the important words and don't capitalize like of or the if it's somewhere in the title. Something that's, I think, unique to APA is using sentence case fairly often. Sentence case refers to how we would punctuate a sentence. So we would only capitalize the first letter and everything else would be lowercase. So we most often see this in the references. And so we'll have some examples here. So when to use sentence case, we use it with titles of articles, books, reports, web pages, and other works in the reference list, even if title case was used in the original work. So for example, here is a journal article. We see our authors listed first, then the year, and then school, racial, climate, and academic outcomes in African American adolescents, the protective role of peers. Now, what do you notice there that is capitalized?
Names,
What else is?
ethnicity or race.
And
In the beginning of the sentence.
Yeah, exactly. So there are three instances of capitals here. So the first word of the title, then after the colon, that's the main title. This is the subtitle, the protective role of peers. So we do capitalize the letter right after the colon to begin the subtitle. And then, as you mentioned, African American is that proper noun or racial or ethnic group. So this is typical of titles of articles, but notice here that the journal name is in title case. So that's the way that works with a journal article reference. Here is this is a web page reference. So here we have the authors, they're actually editors, the year, and then this is the name of the web page, integrating multiculturalism and intersectionality into psychology curriculum strategies for instructors. So here you can see this is sentence case with just the first word of the title and just the first word of the subtitle capitalized. But you can see the name of the organization is in title case. So it's really, if you just remember titles of articles, books, and web pages. If you can remember those three things, that the names of those will be in sentence case, then you should be good in setting up your references. Now, sometimes, hopefully you've figured out how to get references from the databases or the library websites. And sometimes they're correct on this and sometimes they're not. Even if you choose APA citations, that's often something that for some reason is a mistake, is the sentence case is not used. So you can just check that.
I'm sorry, do we use the term sentence case instead of lowercase now?
Well, it's a little bit different. So sentence case means that we do begin with a capital, but then other terms are lowercase in the sentence.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. So it's kind of unique to just how we would capitalize within a sentence. We use title case for all our headings, which is pretty typical. I don't see that as an issue most of the time for students. All 5 levels of headings, we use title case, where every important word is capitalized. That includes the title of your own paper and named sections and subsections within it. Sections in your paper, which isn't super common, but you may not, I mean, what I mean is you may not refer to that section, in your own text. Titles of periodicals. So this is where I was saying the journal name. These are italicized and in title case. And then figure and table titles are also capitalized, both where the figure is, where you've named it, and in your text that precedes the figure or table. Okay, any questions on capitals so far? Okay, we have our second celebration of knowledge. Stacey, I love it. Okay, so now you can see the numbers are all the same because we're past that. But this is looking for capitals. So this one is the participants of the study identified as Hispanic, Black, white, and prefer not to answer. So what would you choose there? You can put your answer in the chat. Okay, good. I'm seeing a lot of C's, and that's correct. We would capitalize all of those racial or ethnic groups typically. Next one, school counselors can utilize cognitive behavior therapy with students to address negative thinking patterns. Would you choose A or B here? Okay, seeing a lot of A's. And that's correct because we have that down style and there's no name in this particular therapy. And then this is going to be a little harder to look through, but which is correct. So this is a journal article reference. So you can look just at the name of the article. So should it be A or B? Okay, and the correct answer here would be A, because we have schools need to know about fostering school belonging. Those are all in sentence case. Whereas this one is in title case. No problem. Okay, now this is a book title. So which one would be correct here? The Ecology of Human Development. That's what we're looking at. Okay, seeing some A's and B's. So this one would be A. Because we have just the T of the and just the E of experiments, the title and subtitle, first letters of each word. And then the rest is lowercase. So remember article titles, book titles, and web page titles. Those are in sentence case. So if you could just kind of remember those, it'll be helpful. Okay. Well, that's what I've got for you tonight. So, does anybody have any questions right now? Okay, what I'm gonna do, I'll stop sharing right now. Okay, so to finish things up, we're going to have a raffle. So, if you would drop your names into the chat, then I can copy and paste them. And while you're doing that, if you would please, I've got my little QR code here for an exit ticket. If you wouldn't mind, there's a link. Let me paste the link here. Sorry. I'll paste the link in the chat as well. So the reason why I like doing exit tickets is because we really want to hear from you, not only on, general feedback about our workshops, but also what are the workshops or topics you would like to see us cover in the future. So I want to make sure that the workshops are relevant to your needs as a student, so we can be sure to meet those needs. Your voices are important. So if you could do that, I'll get the raffle set up here.